Come, come, ye saints, no toil nor labor fear, but with joy wend your way. Though hard to you this journey may appear, grace shall be as your day.
Well, welcome back, Mormon Stories listeners and viewers. We're about 2.5 to 3 hours into an interview with Brooke and John Mclay. Just as a recap, John and Brooke together kind of served in the LDS church education system for 14 years. And a few months ago decided that their integrity impelled them to resign from the church. And so we're having a big, long discussion about, and a very interesting and meaningful discussion about that whole process for them and why someone would leave the LDS church, especially in a position of such prominence and high visibility. And so where I'd like to turn now is to, so each of you sort of in parallel got to the place where you said the church isn't what it claims to be, and I can no longer believe in it the same way that I did. What I'd like to explore now is the journey from that point to resigning your membership. And, you know, I don't want to spend hours on that, but I mean, the extent to which we can, and let's save 20 minutes, let's just talk about that process.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
Tell me what's you're sitting there, you're in CES, you're an institute teacher, you're high profile, you're
right.
The spouse of someone who is all those things. You're loving your experience, you love the church, and all of a sudden for you it's not true anymore.
Yeah.
What's that like?
Yeah, good question.
That's a very good question. Well, it wasn't all of a sudden, it didn't happen overnight, and I think I've mentioned that I was kind of reserving the right to, and even had the expectation that I would sift through this as I had in the past when doubts had come, and that I would be able to work it through. And so, for example, in April of this year, Mark McConkie, who's a stake president in Colorado Springs, approached me and said he'd like to have me join him on a tour in the Holy Land, and that I needed to, contact somebody, but I would be kind of a co-director. And I've done that before. Been to the Holy Land twice with a good friend of mine, and he has a company, and I went in 2005 to kind of learn and experience it, and then in 2007 I helped direct tours there. So in direct answer to your question, I remember when he asked me, these doubts were already brewing, and they were very strong, and the feelings and the conversations that we'd been having were very real, and I needed to deal with them. But I wasn't ready to abandon ship. I was even though I remember walking away from the stake center after he invited me to do that, and going to my car and thinking, if he knew the thoughts in my mind, he probably wouldn't invite me to do that. Not that I wasn't living the gospel, I was, but I was having all these doubts and these apostate ways of thinking, and it wasn't long after that I was in EFY session director training, and really torn, because I believe in being honest, and I believe in having integrity. And so there was a part of me that I said to Brooke, should we take this trip, or is the writing on the wall and we are going to be leaving, and so why have them use funds to fly us out? But I really sincerely believe that I would be teaching EFY, that I would be doing BYU Education Week, that I'd probably be making a trip in 2012 to the Holy Land with Mark McConkie. These things were going to come. So I was in this kind of place of back and forth, and we sat in that training, and one of the speakers, I won't use a name because people would probably know it, but I was sitting next to Brooke and feeling that it was one of those talks where it was like, this is how I would describe it: a lot of name dropping, a lot of, ooh, guess who I saw, and my children have met these brethren, and I kind of turned to Brooke after and said that is one of that talk doesn't help me want to stay. It was like I'm working through this. It was kind of like, I can't keep doing this. It was just reminding me of all of my concerns and this elitism and this one true church mentality. But the very next talk was given by a friend of mine who's another administrator at EFY. and it was so good. It made me feel like, I love this. I want to be a part of this. In fact, at the end of his talk, he said, I'd like to conclude by sharing a letter that we got a couple of years ago that was forwarded to us by one of our session directors. And he said, of course, I've removed the names, but the name of the young man was Josh. And I leaned over to Brooke and said, it's Josh. I said, that's one of the boys from my session. He didn't even have to read the letter, and I just knew. And sure enough, it was one of the many letters I've received that said, my experience at EFY and my interaction with the Mclays is I'm going to go on a mission. I'm changing my life. I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, but I still have that. And so then I was like, I got to stay. Like I'm making a difference. But then in my mind, I'm like, if the church is not what it pretends to be, what it says it is it really better that they go out and become even more indoctrinated as a full-time missionary? Because that's a regiment where if you live that, I mean, you're really going to buy into the church. It really sinks that in deeply. And so to cut right to, and because I want to directly answer your question, there was some back and forth. The last time I was teaching in the classroom on a regular basis was May, is when the semester ended. And so I was teaching at the Air Force Academy and at UCCS when the semester started in January. And this journey really began in earnest. I started feeling like I needed a different career. And I started looking at jobs loosely in January. But by February, March, and then into April and May, I was having, that's when we started discussing we may not be able to stay.
Stay what?
In CES for sure. In fact, it kind of went like this. I need to get a different job because then I can be objective. In my current position, there is no room for us to fade off gradually. I felt like I couldn't say to my bishop or to anybody, I'm having these doubts, I'm having these concerns because of who I was and I was the way that I was looked upon. And if I'm being completely honest, I was worried about damaging the church. I did not want to do anything that would cast a negative light on the church or hurt somebody's testimony. And so I remember teaching, for example, Enos. I can't remember if it must have been a Book of Mormon class or if I had gone there as a cross-reference. And I was having major doubts about the veracity of the Book of Mormon. And as we've discussed, I didn't go into details there, but specifically what I perceived to be plagiarism and what I perceived to be things that were not true and that were inaccurate, and the anachronisms, and not just the things that are in there, but the things that are not in there that I feel like should be if it was more of an accurate book. But in my mind, I was able to say, my undergraduate degree is in English, and I said, it's still a piece of literature that is before you with value. So teach it as such. And so ask the questions that you know how to ask, and students responded, and they felt the Spirit. At least that's what they told me. But again, I did too. I was tormented, and I was struggling. But I never once taught anything than what the curriculum said in the scriptures. I was true to my commission as a CES teacher. Although some people, even recently, have questioned me on that, or have questioned my integrity, because they've said things like, just going into the classroom is a testimony in and of itself, Brother Mclays. So if you go in with doubts, or if you go in thinking something else, then you're not being true to. But my point in sharing that was the semester ended, and it was kind of like, thank goodness, because I was so tormented, and I was so grateful to enter into the summertime. And the last time that I spoke publicly in a church setting was on May 22nd, an institute graduation. And that was difficult for me, and I gave a talk that was a little bit recycled from a graduation a couple years ago, but I tried to select things that were reflective of how I felt. But I was also at that time feeling more and more like, not only am I going to leave CES, but could see the writing on the wall that this is probably going to leave. I'm probably going to leave the church. And I want to say that part of that for me was that I really felt like we felt like we needed to have ownership over this decision. We didn't want to be made an example of. And I felt like if I were to say, leave CES, but stay in the church, because some people have said, why did you resign? You know, I can get why you left CES maybe, but why did you resign? That it might have led to excommunication. I was such a visible figure in the church, and I I'd had significant callings. I was a high priest. I was serving in the bishopric. I don't think I've mentioned that through most of this. When was I released? Was it May? I think.
I can't remember.
Anyway, just a few months ago, I was in the bishopric. And I was very concerned, and I think the more I've processed it, rightly so, that even though it wouldn't have happened right away, and I don't mean to throw priesthood leaders under the bus or say that they're not good men or that they wouldn't have done this lovingly, but I think that they would have said, here we have an apostate, somebody who no longer believes these things, and all this time he has professed to believe it. He could be a great damage to the church. We're going to have to deal with this, and it would have happened slowly but surely, and it was important for me for me it was about mid-June, when I just went, I don't believe it. I no longer can buy into the truth claims of the church. And for me, it was a very freeing realization, but it was also devastating, because then I knew what that meant from my life. I think I did. I was beginning to feel what that would mean. So did you want to add anything, Hun, as far as
what was it like
timing?
for you, Brooke?
The process.
How do you go from like, I don't believe it's what it is,
to like
like,
saying we can do.
we got to resign?
I would say that true to Mormon doctrine, there is opposition in all things. And the process was equal parts fantastic and horrifying. Between maybe March, April and May, and probably June, and maybe even into July, I literally could barely drag myself out of bed. And it's a really strange thing to go from believing that you're one of the most healthy people you know to almost overnight realizing that you may be on the verge of either going crazy. Because so many points in this process I kept thinking, why am I seeing it this way? I know that the answer is it has to be true. And so there were times where I literally felt like either I was on the verge of severe clinical depression, which is strange because I'm a regularly optimistic person. But I remember the night that I went to bed, and kind of as you go to sleep, you start to decompress thoughts. And I realized if the church is not true, I am not a special, maybe I don't have this like special place that I always thought. And that realization was so, I think that it's been described before, like when you're burning new neural pathways, it's literally like burning new muscles. And that was very much what it was like for months. It was so absolutely devastating to realize that some of these things that I had so clung to, even without realizing that I had clung to it, were being ripped from me. At the same time, I remember early in the process saying to myself, I wonder because I became very concerned about what do other people do? I literally would sit down with people at business meetings and say, how were you raised? What do you do for meaning? And to me, it's so sad that I had been so raised to not give people validation for their life choices that I literally never knew what life outside of our church could be like. And I honestly believe that these people thought they were happy but weren't actually happy. And so I had spent months asking people, what do you do? The CEO of Dole Foods and I had a 3-hour discussion on how he brings meaning into his life because I could not wrap my head around it. And so sorry, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, we kind of went, it was sort of a journey in the summertime, traveling with the family to many different places, in part to meet people and ask them questions about God and religion and about faith. And to be fair, it was kind of like the avoid church at all cost tour. I mean,
yeah.
It was kind of like, I was in the bishopric.
It was like our own summer sabbatical.
I was so tormented, and I know I've said that word more than once, but I wanted to fulfill my calling with integrity and honesty and be that person that people thought that I was, but I could not deny that there was a real rift in, that there was things going on internally.
Yeah.
And I remember, if I may just interject, that we went back and forth. We were generally on, I think Brooke once said to me that we've been on the same page. If we haven't been on the same page throughout this process, we've at least been in the same book. And so that's a blessing, because as you know, John, and as listeners know, this doesn't always happen as a companionship. And sometimes, and I know of people right now, as do you, where marriages are at risk and there is great pain because you have somebody who truly believes and somebody who no longer does. And it's a hard thing. But I remember once being in the kitchen and Brooke, probably the most common question we asked ourselves was, are we being deceived? Is this the devil? Are we being deceived by the adversary to think these things and to allow these things in? And there was back and forth, but I remember once Brooke saying, we have to stay. We can't. And it was just that feeling of, what are we going to do without it?
I believed as I looked back, I realized that we had been socialized in the Mormon way. And so much of our social fulfillment came from fulfilling these things which we had been told were important.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if we would be able to create a new life foundation or facade, or I don't know, whatever you call it, that could create fulfillment, like doing everything that your mom and dad said will bring happiness. You know, even though some of those don't bring happiness, back in my head I have this speech. And so I felt like we've already socialized ourselves to it, why change? And that...
Well, but my response on that day was, I think I said, you do what you need to do, sweetheart, but I'm done.
Yeah, you did.
That was one of the days where I was able to say, if you want to stay, that's okay, but I can't. I had reached that point in the summertime where I couldn't, in good conscience, continue to live and perpetuate and pay tithing to and contribute my time, talents, and everything that I am, all those things, to something that I believed was not true. And so...
Yeah, so back to I just want to go back because I wanted to finish about first of all, I would guess that some of the people that listen to Mormon stories are in that phase of just, I don't know how else to describe it except just mind-numbing exhaustion. You feel, it's literally like discovering a whole new world, and you don't know if you're up to the task, and you don't know if you're capable. And, you know, I would say, I was so grateful for the people when I was in that stage who would say, it's okay, be patient with yourself, allow that phase to come and go, and it will go. You're not there forever. And that gave me great hope that regardless of whether we stayed in the church or not, that I wasn't going crazy, that other people had been there and felt that way, and that there was a new space of enlightenment that would come. And I absolutely believe that to be the case now. You know, there are so many people, a couple of friends who said, I promise it gets better. I can't explain why.
How'd you find these people?
But it does. Some of them are, like I have a cousin who left the church that I reached out to early on. And, you know, again, that's the thing, is that the only people I knew that were safe to reach out to were people who had left, because I knew that people within the church were going to always tell me that the church, we always had the same final conclusion. So I had to start reaching out to people who I knew were open. So I had quite a few blogging friends from a multitude of faith backgrounds that I would reach out to.
I just want to say something about the people that we did reach out to, and you tell me if you remember this differently. By and large, I don't recall anybody saying, leave, get out, run from that.
Oh no,
These
not
people
at all.
said things like, hey, you do what's best for you.
Yeah, whatever.
If this works for your family. In other words, I never felt like the devil was pulling me from the other side to come over and make this decision to leave.
No, they were just an
You're saying your
open
non-LDS
space.
friends were
That's
actually
right.
saying...
People that have left the
yes.
church, that were disenfranchised, that or that never were members of the church, were saying,
hey man,
you know, there's value in this. If you think you want to stay, if it's the best thing for you, you need to do that, and plus your career. I mean, it was interesting to...
But at the same time, they were also very willing to say honestly their perceptions of what church membership was.
You bet. If we
and,
asked,
you
they
know,
would tell.
and here's the big surprise. There are a lot of very well-educated people who choose to not become members, you know, and I think that because I always thought, well, people don't become members because the Spirit hasn't moved in their lives yet. And so to realize that I had multiple friends who literally, I have one very good friend who's extremely eloquent, and I had reached out to her, and she had kind of had a fundamentalist background growing up, and just came to a point where she said, I knew a lot about the Bible, but I realized I didn't know very much about God. And so she said, you know, she still mourns every day that her kids won't have the flannel board stories, but she feels that in some ways, for her, she's discovered that not going to church allows her to be more compassionate because she doesn't get caught up in all of this stuff. And so she very well understood this very difficult choice between buying into it fully and having the support of this community and, you know, the fellowship of believers, and then choosing this more personal relationship with a God or with the universe or whatever you call it. And so I really appreciated just the open sounding board that all of these people offered, not, and John's exactly right, not one of them who said, in fact, they all said, you're very courageous to ask these questions. This would be a very difficult, you know, you're in, maybe you should stay where you are. You might be happy.
I can count on one hand the number of people that are in the church, fully active, believing members, that have said to us, maybe I can count it on like two fingers. I'm trying to think who have used words like courage and integrity in relation to our decisions. By and large, our decision, as you might imagine, has been viewed as flawed, and that all these pejorative terms come out. We've been deceived. We're broken. You know, when your own parents think that the devil's got a hold of your heart, it's been very pejorative. And so people have tried to fix us and tried to help us to come back because that's what they feel would be best. But it seems like people that have gone through this or who are outside of it, they have a different perspective, and they will look at us and they'll say, really? You were that involved and you left? Wow. That takes courage, and not that I was fishing for people to say such things, but that, you know, that was one of the first things when you and I first talked that you said to me, that said, here's somebody I think who maybe understands on a level that most people don't, the level of difficulty it is. It really, I've been accused of, and I think people who leave are accused of taking the easy road. People will say, you just wanted to be able to drink. You just wanted to be able to go have sex with more people, or you wanted to be able to do this. You couldn't. You chose the easy way. It would have been easier for the Mclays to stay, and I've already said that in this podcast, but it was a tremendous decision to get to the point to say, not only am I going to let go of my career, but I'm going to let go of my identity.
Yeah. And
I was completely into the church. I was Brother Mclay, and everything about me. In fact, I think at points I felt like anything good that was in me was somehow connected with the church and with God and with my job and my membership. And so it was not an easy thing mentally, spiritually, or emotionally to arrive at a place where we could say, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to write the letters, and we're going to...
With that said, and back to my point of opposition, you know, here, just one example. Early in the process, I remember saying, I'm just going to pretend this week like I'm not Mormon and view the world through agnostic eyes. What would the world look like in that way? And I literally could not believe the switch that happened as soon as I became not important with not a mission. For the first time in the 13 years that we've lived in Colorado Springs, I walked out my front door and every person mattered to me. And I stopped and I took time to listen to them and to give their very real feelings, very real validation. And so in that way, it's strange because the journey is more difficult. I feel like it requires more energy for me to inhabit my space now. But it's so much more fulfilling to live a life where everyone matters and there's this whole array of emotions. And so in that way, you know, there's this beautiful bliss that comes along with stepping outside. And so it was a strange thing. In fact, I think it's Maya Angelou who says, there's something profound about the human spirit where after a night where you think that you might die, we somehow wake up in the morning and someone asks us, how are you? And you say, I'm fine, thank you, and how about you? And I found that I would be so tormented at night, and then I would wake up in the morning and see another human and think, but I can be here for them. And that was a really big shift. And I think that that's the first time I understood what it meant, what Christ meant when he said, to pick up the Samaritan and be truly compassionate to another soul. So
There's still, so I get how you get to the precipice of saying we can't stay in the church, I can't stay in CES, maybe we're even going to go inactive. But this next step of saying we're going to actually write letters of resignation,
right.
You've even told us logically that you wanted to take control
I did. I wanted
of the process.
create an objective perspective and kind of step back and say, let me analyze this as a member who's not also in CES and held up on a pedestal. But
But how do you talk to us about that process of like actually deciding
Saying,
to resign,
let's do it, and then doing it.
writing the letters,
Yeah.
submitting the letters,
big,
what the
yeah.
reaction
Can
was,
I-
and then talk about
what's the reaction.
Okay,
a
so
few weeks later.
Okay, so I'll take us up to the point, and then you can take us
Sure.
to the reaction. So I think that this was essentially how we saw it from our perspective, and come to find out, there are a lot of other ways to do this, and so I recognize that the way that we went about this is not the only way. But we felt that we had a pretty clear understanding of what it meant to be a true believing member of the church. And not only did we have that understanding, but we had lived that completely. And so when church membership equals, let's say, the temple recommend questions, that became very clear to me. I would call that kind of the pinnacle of membership. When I felt like my opinion on most of those questions varied too much to answer those questions sincerely. And our variations on those questions were important enough that we would be also teaching our children a different view and perception of some of those things. I don't think that we felt like it was honest for us to stay. That no matter how much we loved the people, no matter how much it pained us to imagine the sort of backlash that we would have to feel, we had lived our faith in such a public way that we didn't know how we could, with integrity, not submit our resignations. Because to sit at an annual temple recommend interview and say that we believed in the God, and we know exactly which kind of God they're talking about. They're talking about the Mormon God. We were the type of people who had so obviously understood what that meant that when we came to a different conclusion, we just felt like the only option is to resign. Now, of course, there are things like Stay LDS and all of these other websites that help you find a middle way, and I suppose that for some people that's a truly profound journey, and perhaps we would have found some incredible value in that journey. But because we feared
And our message is not...
disfellowship.
I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine.
Our message is not everybody should leave. I think for some
Right.
people, they need to stay and that it works for them.
Absolutely.
And we completely respect that.
Yeah.
But we felt, as a matter of integrity and as a matter of where we were, and to reiterate, Gordon B. Hinckley, Joseph Fielding Smith, there is no middle ground. So where does somebody who really truly believes that the church is the true church on earth? I mean, even as a teenager, I had thoughts that if this church isn't true, none of them are. I mean, this is the one that makes sense, that answers the deepest questions. That these are the solemnities of eternity are contained herein. And so when that blew up for me, and I realized that it wasn't what it purported to be, I could have stayed, but why?
Well, and I think we
I
had
really
some fear about our children having to go through the
Yes.
sort of pain that we had just
that
been
was
through.
definitely part of the
And so we felt
process.
like, again, for the integrity of our own family,
that they would someday have the same crisis of
Yeah.
faith that
Right,
you
like-
did, and that they would turn to you and say what?
and say, we're like, what if they were afraid to tell us that they had come to a conclusion that the church was not true, and they thought we were in this very TBM state, and then we were like, oh, actually, all along we like just that whole
Or what if they turned to you and
maneuvering.
say, why did you guys deceive
Stay.
me? Why were
Yes,
you part of the deception?
exactly.
and we realized that some of
because
this,
again, when we say we're going to be honest, we
Yeah.
really, to me, there's one way to be honest.
we realized that part
You
of our
mean what you
decision
say.
involves conjecture. That I was, like I mentioned, I was worried about possibly being excommunicated. And since I was living the commandments in the same way that I always had through my entire life, I didn't want to be made an example of. Now, could I say for sure that would have happened? I can't. Can we say for sure our kids would have grown up and had doubts? No. So yeah, we have to, just like anybody else, we weigh the evidence, we look at what's before us, we consider our personalities, we look at my career, all the different elements kind of came to a head where it, Brooke once said, I don't want to be the family that is not going to church on Sunday and loading our kids in the car to go for a hike, while everybody else who has loved us and trusted us and looked at us this one way is wondering what's going on with the Mclays. It doesn't.
We almost felt like we owed it to those kids that we had taught to help them understand that we weren't just, saying F it to the system, that we had made a genuine choice that was our choice.
Did you say F it? You're so hardcore.
Well, yeah, wow. EFF. And so that was a very serious consideration as well. We were like, if these sweet seminary students drive by and see the Mclays not going to church on Sunday, that's not going to compute in their head. And we want them to understand we're now making different choices because we don't view the system in the same way.
It sounds like it wasn't just a matter of integrity, it was almost an act of respect for the religion.
Yes,
very much so.
That was very well put.
And I would say that is absolutely true.
About my resignation.
I was going to say, go ahead.
I was in a place where if I wanted to send a message that I didn't believe the church was true, I had the forum to do that. I could have been, the equivalent of shouting in the microphone and then dropping it and walking off the stage. But even my resignation, which I realized weeks later put me in an interesting position because I'd never checked into this thoroughly, but I was told I didn't qualify for unemployment because I walked away, which is different than being fired. But what I did was I said nothing, and there were other reasons I said nothing about this, and we've kind of touched on those. But I just said, and I was truthful, and I even recorded some of the conversations, which shows you the level of maybe paranoia or fear that I had that maybe they would be used against me or misunderstood. But everything I said was truthful. We're moving in a different direction. But what I did was I tried to do no harm. I wanted to be to leave as quietly as I could. And I felt the same about our resignation.
Well, and
because you could have forced them to fire you.
Sure.
Which would have helped you qualify for unemployment.
Right.
Plus would have given you probably better grounds for wrongful termination or some type of lawsuit.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and that was exactly.
But I didn't want to because I loved these men.
Right.
I felt like, and I want to be clear, I felt like they had treated us good and that it was a great place to be employed.
Well,
and I didn't want to hurt young people. I didn't want to hurt testimonies. I didn't. It wasn't never been our intent to rattle people or cause them to go through what we've been through.
And so, and in fact, just to indicate the level of respect, and I know that you could rebut by saying, well, you're showing no respect by resigning, but what happened is John knew with communication from his boss that they were going to start a new training program that was going to help the teacher at the Air Force Academy get all of the keys and be there.
Let me just explain because I don't want it. It wasn't a new program. It was just time for the semester to get up and running. And in order for the director at the United States Air Force Academy to have permission to go on base, you had to go to certain training. So in July, when these emails started coming in and I knew where I was, about mid-July, I reached the point where I thought, as a courtesy to whoever is going to replace me and to the system and to this assignment and to these people I work with, I am going to say now I'm leaving. And that way they could find somebody to replace me.
We wanted to give whoever needed to move enough time.
And have this just a smooth transition. Otherwise, I could have gone. I could have gone to the training. I could all the way up to like the day when I had to go into the classroom, and then I could have said, "Hey, I'm not doing it."
And then there'd be no institute teacher for the year.
It would have been
well, and we had made the choice that we didn't want John to go back in and teach, not because we were angry, but again, because we didn't feel it was fair to represent ourselves in a way that we didn't feel we could. And so, again, did we need the money? Yes. Did we need the job? Yes. Yeah. But and John had been looking for other jobs, but really hadn't gotten any bites. But we just said, before this year starts, recognizing everything that they need to do, we need to let them know so that they can prepare. And So,
Okay.
yeah.
Real quick, before we move on to the actual submissions of the letter and the aftermath, what's it like when 14 years of your career, your profession, has been dedicated as a Mormon education, church education person? That's your training, that's your resume, that's your income, and most importantly, that's your retirement.
Yeah.
What goes through your mind, and what things do you have to process in terms of the sacrifice or the cost of this decision for you?
Yeah. It's still hard for me to talk about. But yeah, I have all kinds of conflicting emotions in relation to that. But I remember cleaning out my office before the person coming in to replace me and was coming in, and just going through talks, just piles of paper and notes, and because this is what I did. This is where I devoted my time, and not just personally and with my family, but professionally. And so I guess the short answer is that it was completely and utterly devastating. And I would try to express that to people, and they would say things that they were helpful. They would say, "Oh, well, John, it's not wasted. You've still developed a skill set. You're a great public speaker. You're excellent in the classroom." And I had the opportunity to teach at a community college, and still do, teaching sociology. And I was starting to realize these skills are transferable. I can take these into other places. But the feeling at the time was, I went into this so wholeheartedly, and so I was so committed to it, that to let go of that was extremely difficult. It was heart-wrenching, and I cried. I don't even think I've told many people this, but yeah, I wept cleaning out my office, and I felt some anger. I guess I still do from time to time. I'm past it mostly. That people perhaps, and this is my perspective, in church history, and those who had presented it and made decisions about how it would come down and filter to us, had not been honest, had been deceitful in what they've done. And here I was in 2011 with 4 children and 1 wife, and feeling suffering, really in a profound way, because of things that had, one thing stacked upon another, lies or myths perpetuated, however you want to call it. Now, I feel like I should say that it sounds to me, as I listen to myself, we're painting this picture of that we were so noble, and that we were, we don't think of I don't think of myself as like the exemplar of how to be. I always have struggled actually with my own confidence, and even though in CES, well, I'm trying to find the words for this. It was the only thing in my life that I ever felt that I was exceptional at. I'm a good basketball player. I'm a pretty good soccer player. I think I'm
a good kisser.
I'm a good kisser. Nailed that. But really, I thought this CES and the speaking and the teaching of young people was the thing like I was born to do. And that I believe that God had given me that gift and put me in a place where I could do that. So processing that and letting that go, and kind of looking at 14 years and saying, for what? I cannot believe. There were times when like I said, that I was angry. But at the same time, here's where I've landed with that. And maybe we'll get there in down the road, but I'm not mad anymore about my career. I'm not saying, oh, what a waste of time. I still have those feelings, if I'm being totally honest, sometimes. But again, it was very real to me, and it was worthwhile, and those experiences were mine, and I own them. But the direct answer to your question is that it was wrenching. It was.
So that I'm glad you addressed it from the standpoint of what's it like to walk away from it in terms of your identity, in terms of how much it meant to you, in terms of the time lost. What about the sheer financial and job cost of making that choice as a CES employee?
Well, I think first of all, we are kind of in a unique position because Colorado Springs is largely evangelical Christian. And so, and not that every workplace looks at that, but I think that John's resume, we've been kind of surprised at how, he's got a master's degree in sociology. He has a lot of highly transferable skills, and yet he's had 2 callbacks from,
So
I
how
don't
long
know,
have you been
40,
searching for a job?
Since January of last year.
But really in earnest, March and April. It really
So
started.
9
Yeah.
to 12 months you've been looking for a job.
Yeah,
Close to
and
50
so
job applications.
50 job
I
applications.
think a lot of people
2 interviews.
see
And 2 so let's just
the Mormon.
9 to 12 months, 50 job applications,
Approximately, yeah.
2 interviews.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been kind of a bad market.
So financially, what's that been like for your family?
Well, let me. I'll just be candid about that. Outward appearances, and even to be totally honest, the Mclays have been doing okay. It's kind of coming to a head right now. The church was very gracious when CES when I left said, look, why don't you? Because I said I'm going to go in a different direction. I was very vague about it, but we actually selected August 5th as a date because if I worked into August, then the benefits would extend through August. But in a nutshell, I'll just bullet list what has happened because of my resigning my membership, my CES, and then membership in the church. Although this financial part is mostly the CES, but those benefits expired, and so I lost not only my income the money that I was making, but the health insurance, which was very good health insurance, and my retirement was never really big. I'd borrowed from it in the past, but I decided to cash that in, and I don't know if that was good or not. I'm not quite 55 years old.
You
and
did
so
that because why? Because
to put money in the bank to live off of during this
Right.
transition.
so that you could survive.
Yeah.
Yeah, because in those early months, my website generates some income, and actually over the last couple of months has been a godsend, absolute.
So God hasn't
Absolute godsend.
cursed you.
No, indeed, God has not cursed us. However, there's still, we're kind of facing down, our home is in foreclosure because I can cover the daily bills,
Yeah.
but that's not covering a
The
house.
mortgage.
Yeah. So the retirement is gone, and the savings are gone, and
The health benefits are gone.
the benefits are
We
gone.
did
house
get
is
health
in for-
insurance, but the house is in
Your house is in
foreclosure.
foreclosure.
The health insurance, though, is catastrophic coverage. It's
Yeah.
it's so in case something really big
That's what I have.
happens. Yeah.
That's
Oh,
what I
yeah.
have.
And we're realizing that, in retrospect, the health insurance we had with the church was very good. It
Yeah.
was very nice. One of my friends referred to it as Cadillac coverage.
Right,
I
sure,
think it's
yeah.
one of the blessings and benefits of working for the church was good coverage. But as Brooke said, the home is now in foreclosure, and so it's been a tremendous cost for us financially, and I think one of the, I don't know if I'd call it a regret, and we've already kind of touched on this. I did this to me. No outside party can look in on this and not say, you're the one who walked away. You're the one, you did, and that
people have said
is
as
the
much.
truth.
Yeah.
I made the decision. I own that decision. But I really felt like by now I would have found a job. I just got an email yesterday. I forgot to tell you that another turned down, another one that these jobs I applied for that said, thanks, but no thanks. And I'm torn because I don't know if they look at this and go, man, we can't, this guy has all this experience and a master's degree. And for a while I was like, I was looking for jobs that really matched my skill set, but now I'm to the point where I'm like, I just want a job. Where can I work? I've applied at local banks. I've considered insurance agencies. I've applied to many higher education jobs at colleges and universities to try to get full-time teaching positions or nonprofits. But the direct answer to your question, without trying to elicit pity, is that it has come at great cost. And there have been some people that have, we have a wonderful dentist who's been very kind and continues to,
Yeah,
and he's LDS, and both of them are, and they have been very generous to us, and they continue to be, and there's still some help there.
Right.
But when I say it's coming to a head, I think losing the home is a foregone conclusion. I think we're going to lose it one way or the other.
Well, and I think that just everything that a job entails is gone right now, like identity and security and stuff to fill your time and give you purpose and meaning. And so, you know, that's not a cost that you count into the monthly budget, but
kind of depression or
yeah,
self-esteem.
there is. Oh, yeah. It's been really hard. Well, and then you compile that with like having everybody that you really love go radio silence on you. You know, like we've had family members say, I can't talk to you. And I'm like, wait, this is really the time that you should be talking to us. And so I think that especially for John, that it's been a particularly dear cost to pay, because when he says he lost his identity, he really lost, as far as he knows, his identity. And so and also like just the security that a job where a year from now you know what you're doing, or you're able to put savings aside, all of that is gone for now. And you know, when you're raising kids, you don't want to be those kind of parents. Go us.
So do you ever say, I should have handled it differently? I shouldn't have left. I should have just faked it. I should have just lied.
Not the lie part, not the fake it. I have thought, because you know, some advice that was given to me during this process was, your family is most important, and providing for them is paramount. So you do whatever you have to do. But there was such the integrity and the honesty issue, and the also in principle, because one of our friends asked me once during dinner, saying, well, John, if you don't believe, why aren't you telling your students that you don't? And then that made me think about it differently, and that's when I kind of started to realize I can't stay in this. I can't, if I'm trying the best I know how to be a person of integrity and honor, and so the faking it wasn't really an option.
I wish we could have gone slower, but the job thing made it really unique, because we do feel a great...
Have we talked about how we were going to go back? Maybe this
No. Well, let's go ahead and finish what you're saying, then we'll go to writing the letter in the
because that's regret. I mean, when you say looking back and saying, would you have done it differently? I've thought about that. I've thought about maybe did we resign too quickly? Because I think we're heading into talking about the reaction, and oh boy, people did not see this coming.
Let's do it. Let's go there.
So let me just take you to writing the actual letter is like pulling the Band-Aid off. You know it's going to hurt. And so we just said, we've got to do it. And we had talked to our kids about, you know, we wanted them to write their own letters if they wanted, or not write letters. We tried to leave it very open to our children and be transparent to them as well. So when we wrote the letter, we sent one via email to the church headquarters, and it would have been nice if that was the only one that mattered.
That was hard copy.
Oh, okay.
To the church.
And then
Email
we
to
emailed
bishop and stake president.
our bishop and our stake president. And then a couple of weeks before this point, John had emailed his parents, and just, you know, because I said, I want them to feel like they're a part of this. I don't want to spring this on them. We love them too much to...
It was actually a month and a half
not
before,
communicate. Yeah. So that's how, I mean, it was one of those things where we both felt like there's never going to be a good time to do this. So why don't we just get it out of the way and then move forward from there and breathe? So.
Yeah.
So you went through that process, and then you wrote the letters.
Right. So
well, first of all,
initially John wrote the letter to his parents.
Yeah, the letter to my parents, I believe that was in June. That was a tough one. It was a tough one to write. It was a tough one to send, and it was very difficult to deal with the reaction. And my parents are wonderful. I maybe didn't give them enough credit in talking about my youth, but they are bright, kind, hardworking people who, you know, I was raised with goodly parents.
They're Mormon.
They are good Mormons.
They're good. I love my mom and dad. And so to have my dad's initial reaction be a knee-jerk reaction was hard to take.
Which was what?
Oh, it was, I think I was rereading it came in the form of text messages, and I guess maybe that was more comfortable for him than calling, and I can understand that, but we've got your letter. It's completely devastated us. And keep your poison away from my other children and don't come around, kind of, initially. And it hadn't, we hadn't, and I don't think I had 2 or 3 responses before.
Was this a phone text or email?
Yes, this is phone text.
So he's doing it by phone text.
And I still
Yeah,
have,
not
I was
good.
looking at it again last night and remembering, but it's painful for me to look at. And also, my dad has since apologized. He has since recognized that this was not the best reaction.
We also have to, I mean,
I was gonna
in the
share
interest
that.
of full disclosure.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that he said was in this initial reaction and conversation was that both he and my mom felt that because I was very sick as a child with my ear problems and nearly died, 2.5, 3 years old. But he said that it might have been better if I would have died, because then at least I could have still gone to the celestial kingdom. And so, and it was a lot of, where is my son and who's done this to you? And I officially hate Colorado Springs. I mean, it was trying to find the guilty, who pulled you away, and I think part of that might have been directed towards Brooke, because why would, our beloved son, who was so good and so true, somebody had to do this to you, because otherwise this is inconceivable. And so it was very hurt feelings, and shortly after that led to a pleading for me to come out alone to Utah to talk with my mom and dad. And I remember, because alone was in capital letters, just me. And so I didn't want to. In fact, my initial response was, I think we need to. The reason I wrote a letter is because I knew it would be so emotional. I weighed this. I was going to do it in person. I was going to do it on the phone. I went back and forth, but I finally said, a letter allows me to say what I need to say, them to read it and process it and respond in their time and in their way, and then I'm open to that and we can start this dialogue. But I wasn't going to go out, but I decided to, and that was very difficult. I made a trip alone to Utah and dealt with that reaction of just devastation and heartbreak and my own, my father, I don't know if I've said this, but he was 35 plus years CES. And so I did say that. I mentioned that in this podcast. But so he was willing to talk to me about doctrinal and historical concerns, and he was open to those kinds of discussions. For my mom in this conversation, that was a little bit more difficult. She said, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear anything that would contradict what I believe. And I'm respectful, first of all, of my mom, who I love with all my heart, and I'm respectful to people who feel that way. But in this podcast, and I feel like this is important to say, that part of this process was breaking out of the circular logic that says that everything that says the church is not true is anti-Mormon. In other words, if we define anti-Mormon literature as anything that speaks ill of the prophet Joseph or the Book of Mormon or the church, then we have circular logic that always takes us back to the conclusion that the church is true. And it's breaking that circular logic that allows you to process things differently. But my parents wanted no part of that, and one of their biggest concerns was don't tell your siblings. And I remember in the conversation, in other words, don't be specific about why you're leaving the church. Don't give them specifics. And I remember part of that conversation, it kind of, as it came to a head, was, John, to me, you are very persuasive. You're a very good teacher. Don't use those skills to, and even in doing this podcast today, that conversation has come back to me because my mother said, I'm just worried that someday you are going to be one of those people that goes out and tries to tell people that the church is not true, and that you'll use your skills in a negative way. And so I would say to my mom and to you, that's not my intent here. To me, I'm here to share my story. I'm here to talk about where I am. And if I'm being totally honest, I'm kind of seeking a little bit of therapy, because I've been holed up and I felt very alone through a lot of this. And so I need to talk about where I am, but I have no intent to take my mom or my dad or my brothers or my sister, nor do I have the illusion that I'm capable of doing such a thing. That letter was in June, and then in August 5th I resigned from CES, and on August 11th was when we sent the letters to Salt Lake and to the bishop, and then the reactions began. And the first one was from my bishop, and it was in the form of an email, since I had emailed him, and it was complete shock. And I think he said something like, the word shock does not do justice
Because you had just been in the bishopric, right?
I had. Yeah.
Pretty
I was his
recently.
counselor for about 3.5 years.
Yeah.
Well, and I feel like maybe we could have been a little bit slower with submitting resignations, but we know how the church works, and they had already switched my visiting teachers to stalwart visiting teacher. You know, I had the bishop's wife coming in. She was asking if I'd just gone for a run because I wasn't wearing my garments. And so we started to sense this, I think what Joanna Brooks calls correlating each other. We felt the correlation committee coming in, and there was no room for the Mclays to take a sabbatical. We couldn't say we need to step back without having every siren go off. And so we felt like the only way that we will get peace from incessant phone calls and visiting teachers is to take control of our story and resign. And if we come to a conclusion where we say we are dumb and we made the wrong choice, then we will be rebaptized. But we have to have some space. And we were, even as we were quietly trying to find our own space, we were being more and more suffocated. And so I think that that was kind of, for us, one of the reasons that it was like resign. We felt this, like, everybody, you know, all of this pressure. And then we were like, well, let's just get it all over with, get all the pain out of there. And so I think that that's one of the reasons that it happened so quickly. And I think a lot of people were like, why did you have to take your name off the records of the church? And, you know, and again, it was because we didn't know how else to gain any peace and help explain to other people why we were doing things that were a little bit out of line. So, like, not going to church on Sunday because we were taking the kids for a hike.
And along with that reaction was, of course, sorrow, dismay, anger. And my bishop clearly said, you know, I suppose I'm angry about this. He kind of indirectly cursed our children to the 3rd and 4th generation. At least that's how my wife read it. It was very upsetting to her.
It was. You don't talk about my kids that way.
And so she responded, and I responded, worry about the youth that look up to me that will be affected by this decision.
Yeah. Lots of testimony bearing. But can I share, I do feel like in this process, every cliched reaction that you can imagine is what we got. But I do kind of want to share what I thought was one of the most remarkable responses, because if I was still in the church, I would hope that I would be grown up enough to act this way. But I had a friend who called about a week after our resignations went through, and she said, so do you guys, I'm wondering if you guys would like to come to dinner. And I was a little bit stunned because I thought, here we go. I'm really tired. I don't know if I can do this again. And she goes, oh, silly me, you probably think I'm calling to invite you over to dinner to fellowship you. She goes, oh no, that's all bygones. So do you guys want to come over to dinner? And it was such a remark. She is the only person I have yet had respond in that way, that literally church membership meant nothing. She has not, she's not changed 1 ounce of our conversation. And I really love her for her response, and I felt like there was such true Christianity in the way that she responded. And I wish so much that I could have been a member like that, but I have to hand it to those people like her.
Yeah.
And they were few and far between who responded with such warmth. It was surprising.
There were those who did.
It was amazing.
And I think we've established that Latter-day Saints are good-hearted people.
Yeah.
But the shock, the horror, the disbelief, multiple pleas before the paperwork was to be advanced for me to meet with the bishop, meet with the stake president. One of the emails even said, we can arrange a phone call with the general authority or a meeting with the general authority. Mark McConkie is here in town. Why don't you go talk to him? You know, and they bullet list the things. I remember in my bishop's initial reaction, there was, you know, could it be this or this or this? I've looked at Adam God theory and blood atonement or polyandry or polygamy or whatever it is, kind of like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, hold the horses. And our polite but consistent response was, thank you, but we know that this is what we want to do. Please forward the paperwork.
Even though that was hard.
Before they finally, and our stake president, I thought his response was very mature
lovely.
And very loving, and with complete respect, and saying, you've asked to do this and I will do that if you want me to, but kind of like, is there anything we can do to change your mind, you know?
And when the letters arrived, it made me sick. I put them in,
letters
from the
saying
church.
we had officially, we were officially off the records. They resigned. We got 6 letters all in
Would've
one
been
day
the
of mail.
3rd week of August, yeah.
And I didn't even open them. I just put them away because I didn't, because I still and forever and will always be Mormon. And
my family was shocked. I remember being asked. My little brother called me, and one thing I want to acknowledge is that this is difficult for people. That people are trying to wrap their mind around a shocking decision and find an explanation for why the Mclays would do this. Yet we had just been through months and months of agonizing discovery, and it was not possible in a text or a phone call or in an email to convey that and in a way that I think needed to be conveyed. But you asked about reactions, and I think people expressed concern about having me in their home, whether or not their children would be safe. My little brother said, I guess where I take issue is that you made promises, John. You made covenants, and you're breaking those promises and covenants. And to that I responded, and still to this day would say, that in principle, a Latter-day Saint is okay with people breaking their covenants and promises. As a missionary, that's what we did. In the politest, kindest way possible, we told Catholics their baptism didn't count. And you name the faith, you name the choice, you name the covenant, the promise, the commitment. We were saying the Mormon way is the better way. So in principle, we're okay with people changing.
Breaking their commitments.
You bet, to come into the church. But if somebody in the church, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, and otherwise, makes discoveries and that lead them out of the church, that is not acceptable in any way, shape, or form. And so there was sorrow, and we didn't find out about some of this until after, and the depth of we started hearing rumors that I had committed adultery, that Brooke had committed adultery. Most people, it was kind of, they just didn't know how to handle us. I think some people didn't want to engage with me, and still don't, because they have this image of what a CES man is, and again, I'm not super knowledgeable. There are people that know a lot more about the church, I think, and the doctrines and the scriptures than me, but they don't. I think there's a measure of fear in saying what we represent to them is something very frightening.
But there's a darkness about you.
That is true. That was said as well.
That you've lost the spirit.
We have, yeah, according to some people.
Brooke, I want to you were about to say, I'm still Mormon, and then you were starting to get emotional.
Oh, I know. I was glad to be cut off.
I'm so sorry.
Did you want to finish?
Well, I mean,
you were talking about the letters come,
right,
and the finality of it was hard. Why?
Yeah, well, because I think that it's not like I can flip a switch on 35 years of my life, I'm not supposed to be emotional.
Being emotional is okay.
I feel nothing but gratitude for who I am today because of all of the good parts of the church. I feel angry and sad and ready to distance myself from some of the less healthy aspects of the church. For instance, it works really well when everyone is obeying and everybody is doing everything that they have to be a temple member and make an eternal family. But when one person breaks that mold, for instance, your mother, your gay, sibling, I don't know, all of a sudden it starts to unravel and fall apart. And again, I don't feel like it's healthy to teach my children that there's only one way to be in a spiritual sense. I want them to be open to the mystery and the wonder and their own realizations and revelations about the world. But still, my spiritual language, my spiritual experiences come from this Mormonism that I have so cherished. And so to say I'm un-Mormoned now doesn't sit right with me because, even when I sit down with my friends, I'm still very Mormon.
You still feel Mormon.
Right. I feel like I'm Mormon plus now. And so to feel like the church is trying to take away the Mormon, I don't want to just be plus. I like being Mormon plus. So anyway,
so for you, the Mormon hasn't gone away just because you're not an LDS church.
Yeah, not at all. Nor do I want it to. I like all of the funny, understanding all of the quirky little cultural things. I get all of that. And I love it. So yeah, that was really, I think it caught me by surprise because I had so steeled myself for that resignation that I thought, oh my gosh, why am I having a problem with this? And so of course I'm like, is it God telling me? I'm trying to read into it. And so I think that for both of us, the greatest unintentional piece came, and I do feel like in a big way it is a result of God, kind of, at least in my mind, or life essence, or whatever you want to call it, pushing us to find an almost immediate reconciliation, because we had been out of the church for 3 weeks and I had the closest thing to a nervous breakdown that I've ever had.
So talk about that experience that led your trip to Salt Lake.
Well, if I may just interject here, because what you were saying about feeling Mormon and feeling connected, that resonates with me, and it causes me, I was thinking about a lifetime of service and devotion with progressive steps that you're aware of when you turn 8 and you're baptized, and if you're a man and you turn 12 and you get the priesthood, and then you advance it. And all these things are celebrated, and family members come and there are hands laid on head, and there's progression and growth and development, and including the gift of the Holy Ghost and temple ordinances and all of those things. And we wrote a letter and it was gone.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if, that's where the mysticism of it to me is mind-boggling, that people could think that suddenly the Mclays were dark and different because we had written a letter, as if every bit of whatever you want to call it, spirituality, goodness, and who we were vanished with the resignation. We're still very much those people who love to serve others, and who are, I think we try to be grateful, we try to be good, we're definitely not perfect.
The biggest change that we've had is to open ourselves to more compassion and understanding, so it's odd to be separated from that in some way.
But that may come back up again, that is the giving up, writing the letter, and losing, because I was a Melchizedek priesthood holder, I was a high priest because I served on the high council and a bishopric, and I had the gift of the Holy Ghost naturally, and I wrote a letter. It was gone. Yeah. And then with this story that we're going to go into, I think that comes back into play. And so I don't know if you want to talk about your...
Well, what happened is I have my journal, and this was like maybe a week after, and I said, I've wished over the last 2 days that we could go back at times, that we could just be the people that everybody thinks of us. And so I started to have this, and I think that it's common with any change. You often, whether it's moving cities or the death of a loved one, there's a point at which you say, wait, I feel comfortable with comfort. And we had gone out with some friends one night and had kind of had a couple of interaction with some people who had left the church, and all of them had kind of gone on to make very unorthodox Mormon decisions, as you can. You're allowed to do that, whether you're in the church or not. But I think that terrified me a little bit. First, because I started to fear that perhaps the only thing left was for us to become atheist and have no moral authority. And, all of these fear tactics really were speaking to me. And I came to the realization where I was like, well, you have to do something with your life, and what we were doing with our life was really good, whether we buy into it or not. This is too scary. There's too much unknown. And so we had gone out and with these friends, and by the time I got back home, I just was so tired and so conflicted, and I had fallen asleep, and as I woke up the next morning, I felt like I was just suspended in that place of like not asleep and not awake, and my mind was just working, and I could feel it trying to put pieces together. And as I described it to a couple of church members as we came back, I said it was kind of my Alma the Younger experience, where I felt like it was like, okay, well, if everybody agrees to not be homosexual and drink coffee and not do all of these things, then we have a safe place. And so that's how God is showing us his love, is to create all of these boundaries and rules. And I do think that in some way boundaries and rules create safety, but at the same time, I feel like in retrospect it was just a very weary mind. in
Well,
a very terrified place.
When I woke up that morning, and the first thing I heard was, "We have to go back."
Yeah.
And I said, "What?" And it was so strong that she said, "I want to call the bishop and the stake president right now." And I said,
But I wasn't
"Whoa."
that calm.
She wasn't that calm. She was teary-eyed and emotional, and it was very real. And I could tell something. And even the night before, myself and our friends, we could tell Brooke was kind of off, that this was weighing on her. And what this was, I think, was just a little bit of a break, a little bit of a, what have we done? You know, maybe we did this too quickly, because people walk different paths out of the church when this happens. We got on a jet plane and went,
Yeah.
and
Well,
so.
and I do have to say that if you can imagine the amount of pressure we were under from John resigning and then us resigning our membership, our lives literally went from being extremely full and bodied with people that we love and trust and adore to literally no one. Brothers and sisters would not talk to us. And that was always the reaction. I can't talk to you right now. I can't deal with it right now. And leaving us just in silent
And to be fair, I think they didn't know what to say. There's no language for them in communicating with us where we were.
But it leaves you feeling alone.
It did.
So bitterly alone that I honestly, and because these people are people that we had so cherished and still cherish,
Yeah.
I thought, why are we trying to reinvent the wheel? We have our lives peopled. Whatever, we'll have to make it work.
We can make it work. And
I remember I called two people that morning. I called one of my very good friends, and she said, it's important that you're thinking of these things because these are the matters of eternity. And I appreciated it, but that response scared me a little bit because I wasn't talking about eternity. I was talking about Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. This had nothing to do with eternity because I still had a very different concept of what eternity looked like. But it was for me, it was about survival with beauty in my life and a savory survival. And then I called my sister and she said, honey, we've talked a lot over the last couple of months, and I'm telling you right now, you're speaking out of fear. And she said, don't do anything out of fear. And I was like, this isn't fear. This is not fear.
I think your sister, I think Holly was spot on, and I'm not being critical of you, but when Brooke said, call the stake president, call the bishop, I said, I don't think we need to do that. I don't think we should do that. In fact, let's wait. Let's give this a few days. Let's
but I'm not really a waiter.
But Brooke, she was in fact, I went for a run. I was training for a marathon. I had a 14 or 15 mile run that afternoon. And so this was a Saturday, the first Saturday in September. And I went out for that run, and I started pondering the possibility, because she was very clear, we are going back, we have to go back, we've made a mistake, I'm so sorry. She was even taking blame that I didn't think she needed to take, saying things like, this is my fault, if I hadn't been doing this and that, and I'm so sorry, your career, it was your dream job, this is awful, what have we done? All of those things just in that moment were weighing on her. And so as I ran, I started to ponder coming back. And I will be honest, it felt very good. The idea of being able to go back to EFY.
The great prodigal son moment.
Of being maybe like the prodigal son,
Object lesson.
I'm running thinking,
Yeah.
watch out,
Living
fatty
object
cat.
lesson.
Because
And we were at this point, again, I mean, we'd already gotten to the point where we were like, we don't care what people think. So now we were like, we just want people to love us again. We just want to get back into that place where we're the healthy couple that everyone's looking at. And so we threw the kids in the car, drove to Utah, called and set up an appointment to talk about the great story of Joseph Smith with Mark McConkie, and then he got us an appointment with a general authority. We went and met with the general authority.
An apostle.
An apostle. One of the members of the 12.
Yes.
But you went really fast there, and that's okay, because maybe we needed to.
We showed up at John's parents' house, told them we were coming back, decided we were going to move to Utah just to get, it was like, we were willing to change whatever to just be back into the favor of these people that we love again.
And I really wanted to believe again. I've expressed that during this process, I really did believe that I would reach a point at which I could be the same believing Mormon that I always was. And
in my head,
happened,
I'm thinking, I'll just keep visiting Stay LDS and memorize all of those changes.
When this happened, I thought, this is it. This is my chance. This is bingo. I'm going to be able, once and for all, this is all going to be a faith-promoting experience that affirms what I believed. And that felt very good. And I want to express my sincere gratitude for the kindness of the way people responded. And, you know, President McConkie, my wife, and I don't know how Brooke remembers this phone conversation, but I'll just tell you how I remember it. I didn't say many words when we called over the speakerphone President McConkie. My wife was the one who was really feeling this, and I sort of felt along for the ride, willing to do it. And again, she wasn't dragging me, but I was saying,
Right, we had nothing to lose.
we're kind of riding this out, right? I didn't say maybe 10 words during that conversation, but near the end of it, Brooke said, we would love to be able to meet with the general authority she asked him point blank, and he said, let me make some calls. And 2 of his mission companions are now in the 70, and his mission president is a member of the 12. And so he called back either the next day or the day after, and he said, you have an appointment on Tuesday with this at 10 o'clock in the morning with this member of the 12. And we were blown away and honored. And
How long was the
He was
appointment?
wonderful. About an hour.
An hour?
we brought our children, and we
They sat outside and hit each other.
in the office, playing with iPads and iPods, and we spent the better part of an hour.
And he just listened,
and
it was beautiful.
It was, and I have to say that it was a measure of kindness and compassion that I thought was completely genuine and sincere. Now,
What were you saying?
Our story.
You're trying
Yeah.
to explain in the vein of, we want to come back, but let me explain how we
Right.
got this point so that
Right.
you will forgive us and let us come back.
Yeah, or just
Kind
so that
of.
you'll understand how we got to this point.
I was hoping, I'll be honest, I was hoping that maybe some doctrinal things would come up, because here was a rare opportunity, and we understand that not everybody that goes through this can have this kind of
No,
a
absolutely.
connection. And so we looked at, again, as God's hand, perhaps giving us this opportunity to reconnect and reaffirm our faith and rekindle it. And but no specific historical or doctrinal things were discussed. Well, we brought them up as concerns that we had, but in his was a listening ear, and it was compassion.
Yeah, I think we
and
both said
he really wanted to help.
he had a very grandfatherly. It wasn't as though we were sitting down with an apostle. He was just willing and gentle, and he said, "Can we get those letters back?" And we said no. And
In other
so,
words, is it too late? Have you already resigned?
Right,
And
to
we said,
reverse it.
You know,
And
we're,
we were
we're
like, "It's
officially
too late."
off the records. I mean, when I say that he wanted to help, I hope that I can say that with all sincerity.
He was
That
fantastic.
when the interview was done, he gave me his home number and his office number and said, "Call me if I can do anything."
Yeah.
And so I felt very grateful for that. And then we went and met with a.
Didn't he have one reaction though? Didn't he make a comment about the fact that you would come back? Wasn't there a comment that he made? Something about other people come back, or?
Oh yes, I think there was just a general feeling like, yes, either the only answer is to come back,
Yeah.
or they are lost. I mean, that was just it was like, those are the two options.
Did he say anything interesting? Did he provide any help or support other than listening?
Good question. I think I felt like there were a couple of things that came up. For instance, the homosexuality thing. And my general feeling from his response was, because I said, and this is actually one of the things that I regret saying, and I think that this shows the level of despair that I had reached. I said, I see now, if we approve homosexuality, then everything has to be okay. And like, I'm just talking crazy, imagine that. And I just remember him nodding with a smile, like, yes, you're seeing this now. And that actually, in retrospect, breaks my heart, because, again, that's, I have friends that are gay, and they are good, and I see no problem with that lifestyle.
In your defense, I don't think you said it that pointedly. I think you were
Really?
still.
I think I did.
I regret too. I think it was a fear-based reaction. That what we were saying in there. I don't think I'm certain that we were acting out of fear for what our children might become, fear for the fact that now that we're out, what if we develop bad habits, fear that we might create or adopt a lifestyle that is not conducive to healthy living, or whatever it might be, and that the church was this safe haven for us to come back to, because that's what we knew. We talked a bit about my job and what I had done for the church and my involvement, and he said, would you ask, because he knew that I had a meeting later that same afternoon with some of the higher-ups in CES, the administrator and one of the assistant administrators, would you ask as a favor to me if you can have your job back? And so I did, and he also asked me to have them call him, and they discussed it. And so, and again, he was incredibly kind, and his secretary was helpful, because there we are leaving 4 kids in the office,
yeah.
and then afterwards he came out and rode the elevators down with us to the vending machines, gave each of the kids a couple dollars to let them choose a treat, and interacted with them.
Yeah, he
I
really
even took
gave
some
us
pictures of this
his time.
because I was very touched by the kindness, and then on our way out we bumped into President Monson,
and
my
he
wife
asked the $100,000 question.
No,
hello, he said, and then he turns to our youngest children and says, "When did you get baptized?" And I'm like, gosh dang it, they're not baptized anymore.
Brooke, they had been baptized in January when, because they were just 8.5.
Yeah.
But Brooke gave the current president of the church a 30-second synopsis of our what happened in our lives, including resigning our membership. And when she said that, he said, "What?
You resigned from the church?
Whatever did you do that for?" That's what he said.
Yeah,
and I'm going, "Oh, please don't, hon. don't keep talking about."
Then we just smiled and shushed our way out. We were like,
the
"Nice
bodyguard
to meet you."
was trying to say, "Okay, folks, if you want to just go,
Yeah, he's like, "These are the crazies.
Give the prophet a
These are the
praise."
crazy people."
Come, come, ye saints, no toil nor labor fear, but with joy wend your way. Though hard to you this journey may appear, grace shall be as your day. 'Tis better far for us to strive our useless cares from us to drive to the sand joy. Your hearts will swell